At this time, I'll call the meeting of the Marshall City Council to order with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. The first item that we have is recognition of our departing council members departing because they have chosen not to seek re-election, and they both Russ and John have served the city well, and I have a plaque of recognition to present to each of them. The first will go to Russ Labatt. Russ served as a city council member from Ward 2 from 2019 to 2022. So Russ, thank you for your contributions.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And John DeCramer is also ending his term on the Marshall City Council. He served, prior to serving on the City Council, he did serve also on the Marshall Municipal Utilities Board, but he has served on the City Council from 2009 to 2022. Most recently also has served as President Pro Tem of the City Council. John, thank you. If either of you have anything to say, you can do it now, or you can wait till the end of the meeting. It's up to you.
I'll wait till the end to see how long it goes.
Very good. Okay. Once again, thank both of you for your service to the people of the city of Marshall. We have an agenda before us. Are there any changes to that agenda this evening?
Move to approve.
EJ, you have your hand up. So Steve is.
I'll wait.
Mr. Mayor, I would propose that we pull item number 11, the approval of, or consider approval of the 2023 workers' compensation insurance from this agenda. We will address it. We're exploring another quote that we're trying to properly vet. So we'd like a chance to pull that. We were first under the impression that we had to decide because the policy would go into effect as of January 1st, but we've been in touch with LMCIT and been told that it is common for cities not to even approve this until January. So we would suggest pulling it for tonight so we can do some more research, and we'll bring it back at a future meeting.
Okay. So you have that recommendation.
With that recommendation, I would move to approve the
Motion,
new agenda.
motion by Steve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. All in favor? And we'll close the voting. And the motion passes. Craig, you?
Would be an aye.
Yep, thank you. We'll move then to agenda item number 2, which would be consider the approval of the minutes from the regular meeting that was last held. That was December 13, 2022. The council does have the minutes. Are there any corrections?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Russ. To approve the minutes as they have been presented, we'll move to a vote. And we'll close the voting. And the motion passes. Okay, agenda item number 3 is a public hearing. This is a public hearing on the written spending plan and resolution that authorizes providing assistance and transfer of unobligated tax increments. So we'll have the public hearing. Following the public hearing, we will then act on the resolution that would provide that authorization. So to conduct this public hearing, I'll call first on Sharon Hansen, City Administrator. Sharon?
Okay, Mr. Mayor and council members, we do have a one-time provision in state statutes to authorize assistance and transfer to unobligated tax increment, also known as TIF. We do have President Michaela Hewitt from Baker Tilly who can provide a brief overview, and then our finance staff, including EJ Moberg, has done some background on the spending plan, which is a requirement of the statute as part of this unobligated increment spending plan. So I don't know which one of you decided to speak, but, okay.
So welcome, Michaela.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Before you tonight is a public hearing to consider adoption of a spending plan. As Sharon said, it is kind of a one-time opportunity to use unobligated available tax increments from the city's various districts for special provision. So it provides more flexibility than the existing tax increment law for the use of tax increment funds. The requirements of the use of increment are that the funds are transferred prior to December 31st of 2022. And the funds can be used for projects that would not commence, but for the use of the tax increment assistance, and they can be provided as either a loan or a grant. The project that provides assistance must include new construction or substantial rehabilitation of buildings. The project would provide for the creation of jobs, including construction jobs. And the tax increment dollars must be used by December 31st of 2025. So the law requires you to act on this and transfer the increment prior to December 31st of 2022, but then you have up to 3 years to be able to actually spend the funds on projects and the use of the increment is similar to tax increment districts for primarily site development and other barriers to development, but it provides more flexibility on the types of projects that can be financed as opposed to the current tax increment law. The draft spending plan that's before you tonight is for 3 of the city's tax increment districts that have been identified as having unobligated funds for which this transfer can be used, and those come from TIF 1-1, 1-7, and 2-1. And the total recommended amount per the spending plan is $500,000. And again, this provides the authority to use these dollars. It doesn't, there's no specific projects that are targeted at this time, although there are some identified potential uses for those funds that are in the written spending plan. So that's a brief overview of the project. I can take questions now or open the hearing and address them.
Okay, thank you, Michaela. EJ, did you have anything you wanted to add at this time?
Just that when we worked with Baker Tilly on this, we were looking at the total dollar amount of unobligated increment. It was a little bit higher of a number. We do have some of these same TIF plans help back up. Some of the unobligated actually backs up some of the Commerce Park debt, et cetera. But we had a higher number, but we just thought to use 500,000 as a starting point for us.
Very good. We'll open it up for input as part of this public hearing, either from members of the audience or from the council. Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Michaela, what happens to the funds if we don't use them by the end of December 25?
That's a good question. In this case, the funds are from decertified tax increment districts, which means they're no longer collecting increment, but you can spend the increment. So if after 3 years the funds are not used, they would be considered excess increment and returned back to the county for redistribution.
Okay.
John?
Just, again, the qualifications or the use for those funds, can you go through that again?
I can. So there's 2 kind of conditions. One is the projects for which these funds can be used for has to be for either new construction or substantial rehab of existing buildings. The project for which the funds are used must create jobs, including construction jobs, and the project would not proceed but for the use of these funds. So those are the 3 requirements for the use of those dollars. And then the projects have to start and the funds spent by December 31st of 2025.
Then do they need to be in any specific TIF district or any district? If there's no TIF district there, it's okay to use?
That is correct. So one of the advantages of this provision is that there's no requirements of where the project's located. So under the current tax increment law, you have to spend, the funds are taken from a tax increment district, which is an individual project, and spent within your larger project area. With the special provision, the funds can be used anywhere in the city. They don't have to be within a project area, and they don't have to be like qualifying for a tax increment district on its own. So that's another one of the advantages is you can use it for single projects that may not make sense or qualify as its own tax increment district.
And Russ?
Michaela, are you at liberty to tell us the spending plan? I mean, any of the projects? I mean, you made reference that there are some projects, but at this point, can you be more specific than that?
So within the spending plan, one of the requirements of the statute is you can't simply say, we want to use the funds for redevelopment or housing opportunities. So within the spending plan, we did identify certain areas that would include existing commercial corridors within the city, including the East College and surrounding area, underutilized and/or vacant properties, expanded downtown area, and infrastructure improvements that would allow for additional industrial and residential growth. So that's still a little bit vague. It's not specific projects because at this point, some of them may not be known, but it's defining areas within areas and certain types of properties that the city has determined as priorities for development or redevelopment.
Thank you.
And for each of those projects, if as projects develop, the spending would then be further approved by the city council at that time.
Right, so this creates the flexibility to use the funds consistent with practice of how these projects came forward. I would assume there would be bringing back to the council and saying, you know, here's the project X, there's a financial gap, and here's how the funds are going to be used for that project.
Thank you. Other input as part of the public hearing. Steve?
What happens to the money if we vote this in and the money comes available and it sits there until we find a project to spend it on? What happens, how is that money invested? Is it in an interest-bearing account? What happens to that interest? Can you use it as a money maker until it's decided to spend?
Sure. That's part of our pool right now, and it will remain in the pool. We just have to move it, segregate it from the TIF fund itself. So it'll get its own fund in our accounting system, but the monies will remain in the pool as they are now, which are invested across various items.
Okay.
So there's,
Thank you.
the other part of his question probably is there's no arbitrage issues and I'll say,
No, that's correct.
okay. Any other input as part of this public hearing?
I move we close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. We'll close the voting. And the motion passes. We'll now consider the resolution authorizing the spending plan.
I move the resolution to authorize the spending plan.
I'll second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion? Michaela, I know you don't work with every city in the state, but this is a very common practice that's happening this month all over the state, right?
Yeah, there's, and I will say there was, as a background, correct, there are several municipalities that, by the time we figured out what this means, the implications of flexibility, there has been several communities that are taking advantage of this because it does provide more flexibility. To that point, you know, the city does have several of the pooled funds that are being used are pre-1990 districts, which already have a considerable amount of flexibility, but in additional discussions with city staff, the city's TIF council, it was determined that this was an extra level of flexibility and provided some additional authority to create the spending plan and further facilitate some of these redevelopment and development objectives that may not fit the mold under your current pooling. So that's part of why it's coming at this date. Is there was several discussions of if this is something that the city should take advantage of or not, but.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Craig?
Not getting too far into the weeds on this, but I mean, obviously there was lobby pressure to the legislature to enact the ability for us to do this. What was the driver on this? Or, you know, without getting too far into the weeds?
You mean from the legislature?
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting question. I think part of it is to stimulate development, kind of post-COVID, you know, another means of trying to provide more flexibility. But what's interesting is that, you know, tax increment districts are created primarily to finance the project, decertify, get back on the tax rolls. So generally, there's not a lot of surplus increment or unobligated increment that's being generated from districts. So this was kind of a blessing in disguise that you had these funds available. Not all communities were able to take advantage of this because they don't have the funds that have been pooling in surplus funds. But the impetus is to try to stimulate more development that doesn't necessarily fit the mold under the current tax increment law.
Excellent, thank you.
I just say this has got to be a good opportunity because we've got the ability to do some work in an area that isn't under a TIF district if that comes up. So, yeah,
And
very
Jim.
good.
So if I understand this, we can use this money to stimulate a business, which does not go into a TIF district, so then they're immediately paying property taxes because they're not TIF increment or tax financing. So it's kind of like a stimulus or a grant to a business to put them correctly on the tax roll, to simplify the terms of how this program is working.
And we're using revenue that's already been
Already collected.
generated. Yes.
So if Jim is building a business, like we, the apartments, they're immediately on the tax roll that, when they're completed, instead of going 20 years on a TIF district, if I understand this correctly.
And Sharon?
I guess some of the things that I've heard from other city leaders, and I know the mayor has as well, and I agree, I think this impacts Marshall, is that TIF is restrictive, and I think that it limits us in what we can do to help business development. Housing and redevelopment are really the two areas. So general retail development, some non-redevelopment construction, we're limited. So I think this is a nice way to give us some additional flexibility. The ultimate would be to have the legislature expand TIF, especially for rural areas, because we are more challenged than other areas in parts of the state, especially those that have more population. So this is really good for us, and it'd be nice to have more permanent solutions to TIF, because I do think we're fairly restricted as a city in rural Minnesota.
Other input?
Kayla, just, did you say at the very beginning this could be a grant or a loan?
That is correct.
Okay, all right.
And any other discussion on the motion? We'll move to a vote. Close the voting. And the motion does pass. Thank you, Michaela. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
EJ, and all the staff that has worked on this. So thank you. We'll move then to the items on the consent agenda this evening, and they include consider the approval of various 2023 liquor licenses, consider the approval of the taxi cab license renewals, the acknowledgement of the grants of easement with the Marshall School District, in the progress addition and a grant of sanitary sewer easement, and the grant of pedestrian facilities and utility easement, all with the Marshall School District. Also on is the West Lion Street, North 3rd Street project. Consider the resolution ordering the preparation of the report on the improvement. Consider the lease agreement between Vishay High Rail Systems LLC and the City of Marshall, and also then consider the approval of the bills and the project payments. So is there any item on the consent agenda any member wants removed for separate discussion? If not, is there?
Approval of the consent agenda.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve to approve all of the items on the consent agenda. Is there any discussion on that motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close the voting. And the motion passes. Okay, agenda item number 10 is consider the adoption of the Marshall 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I'll call on Jason, you going to take this? Or, well, I'll call on Sharon first. Sure. City Administrator, and then I believe Jason Anderson, our Director of Public Works, will have some input also. Sharon?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and Council, as most of you are aware, our current comprehensive plan is outdated. It's typically a 20-year document, and we've done there was an extension or an update at one point in time, but really past its point of use. And we have now come to the point of updating a new comprehensive plan. The city did hire a consultant to help us through the process. It was a 15-month planning process. We had a lot of involvement with staff, city engineer, our planning and zoning administrator, and then our economic development director also helped assist, facilitate some of those public input sessions. I know the council participated as well. So we've had an opportunity for the public to comment on it, and then, of course, this presentation tonight. So I don't know if Ilya or Jason were going to do the formal presentation, but
No, we have SRF here. I believe
Oh,
Mitch
okay.
and Stephanie are both here, so we can turn it over to them.
All right, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, council. I'm going to quickly share my screen and give you all a little presentation about some of the work that we've been doing. Just so you all know who I am, my name is Mitch Browse. I'm a planner for SRF Consulting Group. Also on the line is my colleague Steph Falkers, and both of us had the pleasure of working with the Marshall community as well as your staff over the last 12 plus months to develop the draft Marshall 2040 comprehensive plan that we're presenting to you for consideration this evening. So the agenda for this evening, and I'll try to move fairly quickly. If there's any items you'd like to discuss in more detail, please feel free to stop me, or we can answer questions at the end. But our plan is to give a little brief overview of comprehensive planning in the state of Minnesota. Then we'll kind of talk quickly about a high-level overview of each of the chapters within the plan. We'll talk about implementation, and then we'll end talking a little bit about the adoption process. So as I'm sure you're all aware, Minnesota state statutes give communities the power to complete comprehensive planning. There's a number of goals that are associated with that planning process, but generally what we're looking to do is to provide a guide that will assist the community with decision making, especially with regards to land use and development decisions. You can see on the screen there are a number of other goals. Part of this is to help provide a guide that will protect the city's fiscal decision-making with regard to investments in infrastructure as well as utilities, as well as making sure that we're promoting and protecting the public's health, safety, and general welfare. If we take a step back from state statute and just think more about comprehensive planning as a whole, what we're looking to do is develop a guide that will help assist the city with decision-making. It's intended to be used by decision makers, elected decision makers, staff, as well as the public to help them understand what decisions the community will be making. It includes a future vision for the community, which includes goals and objectives, and it also includes an implementation plan that will help the city get to their designated goals. It should include a plan for future growth, including guidance on land use and development decisions, as well as zoning decisions, and any changes that maybe need to be made to the city's development regulations. It should help to protect and enhance city amenities, as well as protect the city's investments in their systems and utilities. It should reflect the will of the residents of the city of Marshall, and it should be built from community engagement, which we'll talk about briefly here shortly. And then finally, comprehensive plans should be a living document. We understand that the city of Marshall will continue to evolve and change over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And it's important that our planning document has the ability to change and update as the city evolves. And so when we bring that all together, what we're trying to achieve is a planning document that will help the city kind of achieve and guide all of these decision making that we've talked about here. So when we talk about the Marshall 2040 plan, we have it broken up into 8 total chapters. We have an introduction and an issues and opportunities chapter. Then we have 5 topic specific elements. And then we have an implementation chapter. And so just to get us started, the introduction chapter is a lot of the introduction I just went through today. It talks a little about what is comprehensive planning, who uses the plan. It provides a brief history of planning within Marshall. And more importantly, it talks about how was this plan created. So as all of you, I'm sure, are aware, we worked with a task force that was made up of members of the Marshall community, where we were able to bring updates to plans, update to planning documents to them, allow them to review them, and then receive feedback. We also held a number of engagement activities throughout this process, including community surveying. We met with focus groups with topic-specific interests to understand more about specific topic items. And then finally, the introduction chapter includes a guide on, how should this plan be used. Chapter 2 is the issues and opportunities chapter. It includes a community profile, which is built of two main elements. First is a review of some of the early engagement feedback that was received through community surveying. It provides a baseline understanding of what the Marshall community wants. And then also includes a detailed analysis of things like demographic data, economic data, to build a community profile. From there, we identified key themes, and building off those key themes, we identified overall goals, which are meant to direct or to identify desired outcomes for Marshall over the planning period. The third chapter, and probably the chapter that will be used the most in this plan, is land use and growth. Within that chapter, we include a number of maps. We have an existing land use map, which identifies how each parcel within the city is currently being used. Similarly, we have a zoning map, which identifies how is the community zoned currently. And then most importantly, we have a future land use plan. Within the future land use plan, there's a map identifying key growth and redevelopment areas throughout the community. That's both areas within the city, in the interior of the city, where we're looking, where may be appropriate for redevelopment and infill development, and then areas also kind of on the exterior where may be appropriate to see some greenfield development outward growth. And then we also have a future land use map, which is a document that you all be using regularly when you receive rezoning requests. What that does is it identifies the preferred land use on each of the parcels within city limits, and also the preferred land use on parcels outside of the city where there may be growth in the future. And those land use are broken up into some general categories like, residential at varying densities, industrial, commercial, institutional, amongst others. And then finally, within the land use chapter, we've identified and have an exploration of key development considerations. It looks into things like housing and residential development, thinking about how much growth is the community expected to see, and how is that growth going to be accommodated with housing. There's a discussion on housing preservation, including tools that the community can use to help maintain and preserve its existing housing stock. And then similarly, we have a discussion on mixed-use development, which is something that's a key part of the future land use plan. There's a fairly new concept for the city of Marshall. The overall goal for the land use chapter is generally to plan for growth and change that will support living, working, and playing in Marshall. We want to make sure that the community is maintaining its identity and providing a high access quality of life for all of the residents of the community. Underneath each of the goals, we've identified a number of focus areas that were used to help build some of the implementation actions that we'll talk about towards the end. And within this chapter, we're looking at making sure that there are flexible land uses and zoning policies to allow development as it comes to the community. We're also looking to, again, preserve community identity and making sure that the community is providing enough housing to accommodate future growth. Chapter 4 is utilities and services. In the context of this plan, utilities and services are referring to our traditional utilities like water, wastewater, sewer, and transportation infrastructure, but also other services like public safety, including police, fire, and EMS. Within this chapter, we look into providing some guidance on how can the city's utilities and services accommodate the future growth that we're expecting to see. It's looking into providing some guidance for making sure that the infrastructure system is sustainable, meaning not only environmentally sustainability, but also fiscal sustainability, and making sure that systems stay online as frequently as they possibly can. When we look at the overall goal for this chapter, we're looking to maintain a system of high quality utilities and services that respond to changes through a focus on maintenance, investments, and needed expansion and attention to regular operations. Chapter 5 is economic development. A few items within this chapter are an analysis of the existing labor force within the community and a parcel utilization analysis. The utilization analysis is intended to try to identify parcels within the community that may be underutilized. What that can do is help the community identify parcels that are ripe for potential redevelopment. And we've provided a couple levels of that analysis, including providing the methodology that staff can use in the future. The economic development goal is generally to collaborate with the community to advocate for new and local investment that makes Marshall the place to spend and earn your money. And within that chapter, we've got kind of three main items that I'd like to call out here. And we want to make sure that the community is providing support to the existing businesses. We want to make sure that the city is taking advantage of new growth, economic growth opportunities. And then the community is also looking to take advantage of partnership opportunities and other opportunities to continue workforce development. Chapter 6 is environmental and cultural resources. When we talk about environmental cultural resources, we're not only talking about our natural environmental resources, but we're talking about things like historic preservation, as well as those cultural factors that make Marshall what it is. And so if we jump to the goal in this chapter, it reads that we'd like to celebrate all that Marshall has to offer, including the people, resources, and built environment, by enhancing the resources, preparing for change, and opening spaces to all. And so within that, we're looking at things like public art to make make community spaces more attractive and usable by the community, as well as making sure that community services are inclusive and provide services for all of the community. And then finally, final topics for this chapter is community facilities. And within this plan, community facilities are things like parks, the library system, the school system, as well as some of our other community service providers like food pantries, community centers, public health facilities, and items like that. And within this chapter, we have called out and provided some guidance for parks planning, which are the Natural Recreation and Park Association, which is from the Natural Recreation and Park Association. What they provide is national level metrics that help communities understand, based on their population, how many different types of park facilities you would expect to see. It's important to understand that this is just something that can be used to help begin parks planning, and that incorporating local preference is still a very important aspect of this. The overall goal for this chapter is to collaborate with the community to provide a network for public facilities that provides the spaces and services to meet the community's safety, education, social, and celebratory needs. And then the final chapter is implementation. All of this context that was provided in the chapters 1 through 7 all kind of filtered down into the implementation chapter. So we talked about key themes and goals, where we're looking to identify the desired future outcomes for the community. Within each of those topic-specific chapters, we've identified focus areas, which are some of those targeted priority areas within each of those topic chapters to help identify what are the important aspects of those chapters. And then building from that, we have a list of implementation actions. And implementation actions are specific actions identified that should be taken to help Marshall achieve its desired goals. If you review those statements, what you'll see is that some of them are pretty targeted and specific, while others are more visionary and guiding. And so there's going to be kind of a mix of specificity within those statements, which will then kind of require different levels of additional research and work when you're looking to implement those goals. And so on December 14th of 2022, just earlier this year, the Planning Commission did hold a public hearing to consider the plan. They, after closure of the public hearing, did unanimously vote to recommend approval. So we're here today at City Council, of course, asking you to consider adoption of the Marshall 2040 plan. Before I finish up, I did just want to take a few moments to just address or mention that it's been an absolute pleasure for Steph and I to work with the Marshall community, the task force, as well as staff, especially staff. You guys have a great staff. They've been awesome to work with. They've been super responsive and really been helpful to us along this way. And so we'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to work within your community. And I will finish up by just offering to answer any questions that you may have. Both Steph and I are here to help.
Thank you, Mitchell, and thanks to everyone who has worked on this this long and comprehensive process. I'm going to turn to Amanda Schroeder, who is not only the City Council's liaison to the Planning Commission, but has also served on the task force that has worked for the past 15 months on with the consultants and with staff on this comprehensive plan. So, Amanda, do you have any comments you want to make?
Just that we did spend a lot, I can't believe it was 15 months, but we spent a lot of time, days, hours on this and the task force. It was very thoughtfully laid out and led, but very open to all opinions of the public and where we want to go. I want to mention, I guess, the implementation I think is really cool because there's actual action plans and things that we can do to better our community, and it's all based on feedback from people in town. So I think it was a really cool experience. I'm very grateful to be able to be a part of it, and I look forward to implementing it and using it.
Thank you. I'll open it up then for any input as part of this comprehensive plan discussion from the council.
About the only input I want to add is, in reading through it, to me, probably the most interesting is getting into all the appendix additions into there, the really detail into it. So it's it's a long read, but it's very interesting. So thank you for all those that did, and thank you, Amanda, for all your work in this.
Any other input? I think in summary, this is a document that is meant, as the consultant has talked about, is meant to be used in the future, and it is actually laid out in a way that it will be a living document that will be useful for future councils, for future staffs over the next 5+ years, and will serve the city and its residents well during that time frame. Any other input? If not, I would entertain a motion to adopt this comprehensive plan.
I'd make a motion.
Motion by Amanda. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. And we'll close the voting. And the motion does pass. Before we move on, a special thanks, Ilya, to you as you have led this from the staff level. So thank you for your time. So we'll move then to agenda item number 12. Agenda item number 12 is the bituminous overlay on various city streets. Consider the memorandum of agreement with Archer Daniels Midland, ADM, for the North 7th Street resurfacing. I'll call on Jason Anderson, Director of Public Works, City Engineer.
Thank you, Mayor. At this point in time, city staff is proposing to include the resurfacing of North 7th Street from County Road 33 to the north where it ceases to be paved surface. With this upcoming project, our standard city mill and overlay project for next year, this is a unique route in that there's also an additional turn lane and stacking lane alongside North 7th Street. So we've been in communication with ADM, and they've agreed that we should resurface these at the same time. And city staff has proposed to take the lead on soliciting bids and doing what we do to get this resurfaced. And ADM has agreed to pay for this, their share of the area identified in red on that drawing. So I think it makes a lot of sense. We're really happy that ADM has agreed to go alongside us on this project, and the MOU is in the packet, and it just cements and bonds our relationship on this project. And they have it signed, and we'd like our council to consider signing it as well. And as far as the mill and overlay project goes, we'll be likely bringing it at the next meeting sometime in January for sure, with proposed streets and getting council to review and authorize us to advertise for bids.
Thank you, Jason. Questions? Craig?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jason, just for clarification on that stacking lane, is that property actually owned and maintained typically by ADM?
Yes,
So do they do the snow removal on that, or do we?
I believe they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've always wondered about that. I mean, it's typically only ever used by their inbound trucks, but I was always curious as to whether that was actually a private drive or if it was considered part of the public roadway.
Right.
So I like that. I think I'm glad we maintain that relationship with them on this because I think that serves the safety of our residents using the compost and tree debris site to keep the trucks and that congestion out and to keep it safe for the trucks that are going in there because obviously a number of times during the year that gets pretty busy there and without that stacking lane, I think we'd have some pretty serious issues there. So I appreciate the effort that's put forward to do this and
Very good.
good.
Any other question for Jason? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. And we'll close the voting. And the motion passes. Move then to agenda item number 13, consider appointments of members to the Joint Airport Zoning Board. The recommendation is that we would have one representative from the Airport Commission and one representative from the Planning Commission. Jason?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Back in March, the council authorized execution of a grant agreement with MnDOT Aeronautics for updating our zoning ordinance, our airport zoning ordinance. Our current ordinance is a 1978 model and in need of updating. First thing we got to do is establish the Joint Airport Zoning Board. So this is what we've got in front of you tonight to consider appointing two members, as the mayor had mentioned, Ron Halgerson of the Airport Commission and Larry Doom from the Planning Commission to represent the city on the JASB. Lyon County has two people appointed, and the city of Ghent and Grandview Township both expressed a desire to have a person on the board. So there'll be a 5-person board with a chair. Here for any questions if there are any.
Question for Jason? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve those appointments.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. And we'll close the voting. And the motion passes. Agenda item number 14, consider the resolution of the intent to apply for Minnesota Active Transportation State Infrastructure Program. Jason.
Thank you, Mayor. The director of UCAP Transit reached out to us recently to ask if the city marshal would be willing to serve as the sponsoring agency for their grant application for some bus stop improvements around Marshall. They have 3 locations identified. I think actually it's 4 locations. There's 2 by Pizza Ranch. No, it's 3. Walmart, Pizza Ranch, and Halterville Apartments. These are sites that we've already been looking at with them through the past agreement that we had. We were in front of the council maybe a year and a half ago to help them get some stops, some improvements designed. And we weren't able to get those all accommodated with that project, so they want to apply for another grant to take care of that. So we've got pretty good cost estimates and preliminary designs for these locations. Their grant request is a construction cost amount of just over $200,000. At this point in time, the city would be proposing to do the engineering at our own cost, but we could work that out with UCAP Transit through conversation later if they're able to pay for some of the engineering fees to the city. But the engineering fees are not grant eligible, only the construction costs, and UCAP would be asking for all construction costs to be paid, and they are responsible for any local construction costs. So there is a resolution in the packet, and I can answer any questions if you have them.
Are there any questions? If not, is there a motion?
Second.
Motion by Russ, second by Amanda. Discussion?
Just to note that since I'm still on both, or on the UCAP board, I will be abstaining.
Okay. Any other discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. And we'll close the voting. And the motion passes. We'll note 1 abstention. Agenda item number 15, consider the resolution of support in the pursuit of the active transportation funding for US Highway 59 crossing improvements, County Road 7/Airport Road trail crossing improvements and trail realignment, and US Highway 59 trail extension. Once again, Jason Anderson, Director of Public Works.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the same grant program as the last item that we just discussed, but this would be an application on behalf of the city marshal for the 3 locations that you identified. We'd be asking for 100% costs of construction costs to be covered by this grant. It'd be a improved crossing at US 59 and A Street with the inclusion of an RRFB type of crossing.
And if I could interrupt you there, that one was also requested by a school board member too, so.
Yes, this is one that we hear from quite a bit, actually, and I've had some other parents of children call about this location. It's a pretty important crossing and well-spaced between traffic signals, so it's a really good fit for a push-button crosser. So that location, the trail extension out by Aldi between Boyer and Windstar, parallel with US 59 would be included in the application. And then the trail crossing of the Camden Regional Trail of County Road 7 and the realignment of the trail to follow the levee. And then RRFB crossing there as well. So we think these are good, these would be a good project. We're going to incorporate them all into one application and see how it goes. Bolton and Mink has helped us quite a bit with this application. So I would propose that if there is a grant down the line, that we give consideration to hiring them to do the design work on this project to reward their efforts in helping with the application. But that can be considered at a later date. For now, we just want council to consider applying for this grant. So I can answer any questions if you have them.
Jason, do you want to address the time frame? Because I think all these, people agree that these are all worthy projects on their own, but they're not immediate. This is a fairly long process for the application through this funding source.
Yeah, this is, as far as grants go, this is about as good as it gets for duration, because these would be 2024 projects. Typically on these PED grants, they're way further than that. The TA grants are usually, they're 2027 funds now, but this one is kind of unique in that you can bring it forward in 2024.
Good, thank you. Questions?
Jason, on the County Road 7 airport, that wouldn't have a raised median or anything, it'd just be signs flashing, is that it?
We're not proposing that at this time. It would just be the flashing lights. We would maybe give consideration for bump outs out by the curbs if they can be fit in with drainage, but we haven't given that a look yet.
And then currently there are bike lanes on the airport road, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, but we would not have those,
This would take away that couple 100-foot skew in the trail where you have to jog down County Road 7. This
Okay.
would line it up and go straight across. This is also a crossing area that we get quite a bit of concern about. In Lyon County, I know that the county engineer gets some concerns brought to him as well, and happy to see that the county is supporting this project as well.
Because that actually carries a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit there, correct?
It does.
and I think, Craig, I think it's a heavily traveled road by trucks.
Big truck
Yeah.
route, both, in and out of town, just to
Yeah.
get out into the industrial park, and then just because of Magellan or Flint Hills,
Right.
well, Magellan and then Flint Hills oil trucks.
Yeah.
That's probably 1 out of 4 at least is a semi on there.
Right, yeah.
It's big.
And we should note, there also has been conversation with the property owner there, so,
Yes, good point. Thank you, Mayor.
yeah. Any other questions?
Not a question, only comment. We do have ones working in Marshall. This is a little bit off topic, but we need to start encouraging our citizens to actually abide by them. I know there's one by East Side at schools or whatever. It used to be East Side, I don't know, True Light. People are not slowing down. So we may have to ask Jim Marshall to give a little encouragement to follow the flashing lights. I don't like to encourage the cops to pull people over, but citizens, pay attention to them. They work if you pay attention to them. They're a great thing. So, but I know somebody just zipped through it the other. It's like pretty obvious that you're going too fast. It tells you you're going too fast. So that's the only comment I have. They are wonderful. I think it's a good grant to try to get.
And Jim, I can attest to that because, again, when I do crossing guard in the morning and I see the locations on Southview and Saratoga, I can see how fast people are going, and it's typical 23 to 32 miles an hour. I mean, And I think the people are just used to driving that speed. I don't think they're paying attention to that 20-mile-an-hour speed limit.
And I'm not suggesting tickets. I
No.
think we just need to give some reminders that these are here now.
You know, I hope that when the motorist sees that speed, that they lay off the gas pedal and slowly.
Yeah, you see a lot
come
of brake
down.
lights come on, but
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
It's new to Marshall, so they just need to be educated. I think we can do it very nicely.
Okay. Any other input? If not, is there a motion?
I move the resolution supporting the pursuit.
I'd second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Amanda. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. And we'll close the voting. And the motion passes. Agenda item number 16, consider the request of wastewater department for the Northwest Industrial Lift Station pump replacement. Jason, are you going to start with this and then turn it to Scott?
Sure, yeah, I'll just introduce Scott Trudson, our wastewater superintendent, to come forward and present this item.
Welcome, Scott.
Mayor, Council, I want to talk about our Northwest Industrial Lift Station. Basically, that station takes care of the Northwest Industrial Park. It is 11 years old now. The pumps that are in there both have about 48,000 hours on them. They're starting to fail. Those pumps were sized, they're 30 horse, they were sized for more growth, which we haven't seen yet out there. So what happens then is the pumps have to be ran slower than what they're designed for, and that's hard on the pumps. So what we're proposing is switching to 15 horse pumps that would be better suited for the current flow conditions. There is a cost savings too. Just the repair of our existing pumps would run about $46,893. If we got two new 30 horsepower pumps, it'd be $67,600, and the 15 horse pumps can be bought for $33,874. So we're proposing staying with the same manufacturer just for the fact that it'll work on the guide rails. These are submersible pumps, so they slide down guide rails down into the lift station, and they hook up to the base elbows. You could switch to different pumps, but you'd have to change that. Also, there are moisture and temperature probes in the pumps, and then there's corresponding relays in our control panels to communicate with the pumps. So all we'd have to do basically is we'd have to just program the VFDs to accept the lower horsepower pumps, and we'd be up and running. So.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Questions? Craig?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Scott, some point in time, if we get additional development onto that, into being served by that lift station, there's always, we're not changing any piping. We can upgrade one or both pumps if we need to.
Correct.
I'm assuming that with the VFDs, these are going to be running probably at what, about 60% of their capacity at best under the current setting right now then?
Yeah, that's what you want to hit for, is you want
Yeah.
to hit for the mid-range. And that's the problem with the existing pumps. We've been running at the low range, which is hard on the equipment, so.
Sure. Very good, thank you.
No question, just a comment. As somebody who's dealt with lift station failure, replacing pumps are very important. Because when they don't work, it flows backwards.
What doesn't run uphill without a pump?
It does not.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
I'd make a motion to approve.
Jim, seconded by Craig. Discussion? Not, we'll move to a vote. And we'll close the voting. And the motion passes. Before we move on then to the next agenda items, I'd like to ask the council to approve adding to the agenda appointments to the library board. Is there a motion to that effect?
So move.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim, to make appointments to the library board. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. And we'll close the voting. And the motion does pass. So earlier this evening, the city council interviewed applicants for the library board, and based on those interviews and those applications, I would recommend that Ben Walker be appointed to the library board, and that Paula Botsford be appointed to her second term on the library board. And I offer that as a recommendation. I entertain a motion to affirm.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Russ. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. And we'll close the voting. And the motion passes. We'll move then to council reports, the commission board liaison reports. Craig, we'll start with you.
Nothing to report, Mr. Mayor.
And Steve?
I was unable to make the EDA, so I will defer that to Mr. DeCramer. Nothing else met.
Amanda?
Planning Commission met, as we talked about earlier, recommended approval of the comp plan. We also talked about some just minor changes to ordinances and that bed and breakfast change, kind of tying in with that rental agreement that we have yet to decide on. But otherwise, everything went well. Not a lot of conflict.
John?
A couple things. As far as the EDA goes, we had a review really of all the projects in discussion, and date to be set up would be some strategic planning, I guess would be the best bet to call it, and discussions on priorities for the next year. MMU also met this past week and or last week, and they've approved their budget for the year and proceeding on. A couple things to note: if you take a note down Main Street, you kind of see one off ahead of us now. You notice that the streets lights are changed a little bit of color. Most of the streets downtown now, or probably all of them now, but downtown are switched over to LEDs. So we don't have that kind of yellow tint that it was before. They're now all the whiter LED lights that kind of match in. I think blend in pretty good. Just another little sideline to note. Some of you may have noticed a kind of a flash in the lights a couple of weeks ago when things were pretty windy out there. Turned out a static line just on this side of Brookings snapped and went across the one of the power lines, and that created a blink, you might say, here. So it gets a little more serious. I know ADM noticed it, and a few other ones have got some very sensitive equipment noticed it. But the cause was really some of the wind and the ice buildup on the static line over by Brookings. So it's can be pretty far out, and we feel the effects of it. So. The Public Housing Commission has not met yet. That's coming up Thursday. A little bit of difficulty getting everybody on to get a quorum together. So we'll be meeting Thursday, but would like to say that Janelle Saylor, who is one of the members of the Housing Commission, will be resigning from the commission end of this year for some couple of reasons or whatever, and we will need to find a replacement for her. So put that in maybe one of the tasks coming up. Steve, you might have to start something on that, but we'll be looking for somebody for the Public Housing Commission. And I think that's it.
Okay, thank you, John. Russ?
I have not met, Mr. Mayor.
And Jim?
I have not met.
We'll move then to council member individual items. Craig, we're going to start on your end.
Well, I don't want to steal any of my esteemed council member colleague, Mr. Luzinski's thunder, which I'm sure is about to come here later, but man, you can't say enough good about our public works folks in the past couple of weeks, and being able to navigate and move around Marshall. And I won't talk to the comparisons to out of town, because luckily I didn't have to go out of town for the past week. But they were busy, they worked hard. I think they did an awesome job. I think we're very fortunate. And if people kind of wonder sometimes, where does your money go? It goes to support good service like that. And, the other thing I want you to pay attention to is that, and we noticed it last year, there's a lot of, as much as we get these blasts that it seems like they never get a day off, there's also times in the season where there's not a lot of snow to move. And you watch that same Public Works crew along with our public utilities, our utility commission, our municipal utility group, doing tree trimming and all the other things. So our staff don't sit around and play cards contrary to some belief. They're working, and I just want to thank them and acknowledge them. And then also our citizens. I've probably seen as good a job of clearing sidewalks and the sidewalk approaches into the street. And, you know, unfortunately with snow plowing, clearing the ends of those walks can be tedious, and thank you to the residents that are actually working to take care of their sidewalks and the approaches. But hats off to our crew. I think we're very fortunate. We've got a good staff and they've got good leadership, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig. Steve?
Ditto, I can't say much more than that.
Amanda?
Nothing more.
Jim?
Well, I'll carry on with Craig, and the reason this came up is I was driving around Marshall today. I called Craig, and I went to see some relatives in the cities, and I was up in Duluth seeing my children. I just said to Craig, you know, we have the cleanest roads of any of those communities. I'll use the example I was on Summit Avenue next to Governor Walz's office, and I can tell you our main street is better than Summit Avenue. And it is a credit to our staff. And that's the question we pose to our taxpayers when we raise the levy. Do you want us to raise the levy, or do you want us to cut services? I would say today, it's worth the money. It's easy to get around Marshall. You could bike around Marshall.
Stephen, flag that part in case we need it in the future, okay?
I knew that was coming. So there is, I called Craig and made that comment today as I was driving around town, just looking at Marshall, because I do that on occasion because I was bored. So the other thing I want to bring up is we know the insurance was pulled off the agenda today. I want to give the staff credit. This probably was pushed by me a little bit today. Sharon shaking her head, yes. And EJ and Sharon and I had some conversations with the insurance agent, and if he does have a second quote out there, and if it actually comes to fruition where it is correct, it'll be a substantial savings for the city. So I'm going to give the staff credit, Sharon credit, EJ credit, our new agent, Joe Larson, credit that hopefully this is all correct. And I think in 2 weeks when this comes back, it's a substantial amount of money the city could save on this, and that's good. It helps all of us. So that's why I want to give credit to our administrator, taking my 32 phone calls, stay back and forth, because it saves money. I mean, it's could be north of $100,000. So the other thing I have, Jason, after the RFPs, and I'm bringing this up, visit with Jim Marshall or Sharon, you could. I was staying at the four-way stop, and our light was red, so obviously I was waiting there, and it turned green, and there's a semi that went flying through. He started honking his horn probably 100 feet before you knew he wasn't going to stop. And I know there's flashing lights on 23, there's all that stuff. That I think I've always been one that says we don't need to slow traffic down, but we need to enforce the laws. That was a scary situation. If somebody wasn't paying attention, that truck honking his horn isn't going to stop a car from pulling out. I think the police need to give a little more, and I know they're busy, but go out there and say, hey guys, we have flashing lights. They mean slow down. They don't mean put the hammer down. It's not just semis, it's cars. When those flashing lights start, and they're throughout the state, they don't mean speed up. Those mean slow down and stop. And I would like to see, that when I saw the semi go through, and I thought, well, if Grandma Jones was pulling out, I shouldn't say it, but if somebody was pulling out, there'd be nothing left to them. It'd have been a mess. And it'd have been a mess I would not have wanted to witness. So
Not to stick up for the bad truck, but just one thing to think about, and I'm not sure exactly how fast they were going, but those are set that when you see the yellow trip, if you're going the speed limit, that'll go. But if he was going 45 miles an hour.
Oh, no, he was going much faster.
Well, I'm just saying, because sometimes you can be past that before it trips, and then all of a sudden you're caught with the yellow
Well, I
and
understand
red.
that. No, he was
Just, not trying to make an excuse for somebody making a bad decision, but
I've seen that more. I happen to frequent Menards. So I also frequent Ace in case Mike Fox is listening. I've seen that more than once out there. So I'm finally making a comment on it that I think we need to encourage speed limits and encourage to follow those yellow lights.
That's also a highway patrol issue, so we should pass that along too.
Correct. So I don't care who stops them. It's just, we don't have accidents if you follow the law. Or you don't have as many. It's all yours, Russ, I think, up to there.
Thank you. Just to expound on one thing Councilman Schaefer said, I think the other thing that our residents have to be aware of is our fire hydrants.
Yes.
They're plugged in pretty good. I know the two on my street are pretty plugged in. I was going to try and get out and get one done today, but I didn't. But I'm sure the fire department would be very appreciative of it. Being a retired firefighter, it's, God forbid, you need the fire department at your home, and you don't want to have them spend 30 minutes digging out that fire hydrant. So I would ask that the residents, if you have one close to your house, maybe a couple of you can get together and clear those out. So that's just my adding on to what Councilman Schaefer said. I'd also like, again, this is my last meeting, it's in my 4-year term, and again, I'd like to thank, first of all, I'd like to thank city staff for putting up with me. Carla's already left for the night, but I would expound on her numerous times during the course of the year that tell me what this bill is for, why are we paying this and all that stuff. And she told me that I was the only council member that ever questioned any bills, but I don't believe that. But anyway, that's what she told me. So thank you to the city staff. Thank you to Jason. Thank you to Stephen, EJ, and Sharon, and everybody sitting in this room, and those that aren't sitting in this room for responding. Every time I emailed or called or asked a question, the response was, if not immediate, very, very soon. So thank you to the city staff. I'd also like to thank all of my committee members, that I served on various committees, from the library board, and everything else, convention, CVB. And two of my council members sitting to my left and to my right. A couple of years ago, we were spending a lot of time together. If it wasn't once a week, at least it was sometimes twice a week, working on and walking through this building, climbing ladders, going into the basement when the basement was dirt, and going up on the roof. And he said, "What the heck are we going up here for?" And so thank you to both of you for putting. We spent a lot of time together during that year. I thank the residents of Ward 2 for electing me back in 2018. Started serving in 2019. They had the faith in me to vote me into this office. And again, it's whether it's one of my philosophies of long term, even for all my life, has been two things. One, I'm a firm believer in a flat tax, and I know there's pros and cons, both of that. And I'm also a firm believer in term limits. I'm not sure what that term limit is, if it's 4 years, or if it's 30 years, but somewhere in between there. From the president, we've got term limits on the president, but we don't have term limits for sometimes our local people, and I think we need that. I think we need some people and positions to be refreshed, and that's why, Amanda, continue to play the rookie card. You can get by with that for a couple of years at least. I did, and the rest of the council will take that into consideration, and they'll say rookie is no more. But I applaud yourself. I applaud C, and I applaud John for coming on as new council members. I wish them nothing but the best of luck, and it'll be a challenging time, and like it was for me, a learning experience. It was a learning experience from day one. And the last person I'd like to thank is my wife and family for they're putting up with me, and putting up with a lot of meetings, putting up with phone calls, putting up with emails, and me leaving, and sometimes not being home for dinner or leaving, or whatever the case would be. But they didn't suffer, but they put up with a lot of me missing time. So thank you to everybody, and thank you, and I wish nothing but the best for the city of Marshall moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. John?
I just first comment, Russ, you tried playing the rookie card about a couple months ago at one of the committee meetings. So, I mean, even at 4 years, he's trying to get away with it.
I'll remember that.
I guess, just kind of as well, continuing on a little bit with that, just thank the community of Marshall for really all the work on it. Ward 1 for electing me several times, putting up with me that way. There's a lot of things you can think back on the big items that I was able to get involved with, and really appreciate that involvement. The Merit Center, the Red Baron Arena. You mentioned the City Hall. This was a big project. That was one of the first things I was asked first time I ran, is what are you going to do at City Hall? So let's finally get this completed. Other things, the comprehensive plan, that is a big issue. So thank you for all those, again, that worked on that. It means a lot to this community because it's going to guide us for the next 20 years or plus. Other things, we helped the environment by approving a new water treatment facility that the city of Marshall was very much involved in, stopping some of the chlorides from getting into the river. So there's a lot of big things out there that were accomplished that I was proud to be part of. But there's also a lot of, I would say, smaller things that happened. Some of the ordinance changes, some of the things that the day-to-day routines that really make a difference in the community, making this a great community to live and work in. And, my plans are to continue living and working in this area as maybe a little less work, but more living. As we look ahead to the new council, really, very pleased. One thing that I wanted to see and is happening is, started with Amanda, you coming on and getting some diversity and some, another viewpoint, female viewpoint into this council, which was badly needed. You're soon going to swear in your first woman of color into this council, which is another great deal, plus other members that John, you mentioned, that I'm sure is going to do a great job as well. But I'm looking forward to that future because I think it's, again, it's going to be a good council and a good group to work with. We give them a number of projects yet that they're going to have to work on. You guys are going to have to keep on going on the aquatic center. That's a big thing. To me, one of the things would have liked to have seen gone through, but it's well in process, is the rental registration and inspections that we mentioned. We've got half the population of this community that's renting, and we need to take care of them as much as we take care of everyone else. So I guess thanks to the city staff, one of the things that happened is recently in this past year was the wage study, and making sure that we're paying the staff market rate wages. I think that's very important. We have got an excellent staff here. You look at all the individuals with individual certifications to perform their job, the criteria that they meet on a regular basis. Thank you to all of you in the city staff, doing a good job. It's good that we're paying you a market rate, and I know that was a little bit harder this year because some took a little bit more of an increase, some stayed flat, but this is an excellent community with excellent people in staff positions, and thank you all for that, for your work in that. And, with that, I think I'll end at that point and just thank the community for the time. I really do enjoy this, but like Russ said, it's time for others to take in too, and to step aside and watch other ones come in. And I'm looking forward to that. I think we've got a very bright future. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Russ. Let's recognize them for their service. We'll move on then to our staff reports. Sharon?
Just want to follow up a little bit on Councilmember Schaefer's comments on streets. Our Parks Department also put a lot of time in. They weren't able to get all the trails done before the weekend. They got 25 miles to clear. So obviously vastly different than maybe a residential property sidewalk, for example. But they're getting close, and hopefully by tomorrow they can be completed. And then perspective, again, just 80 miles of streets that Public Works has to clear and take care of, exclusive the airport we got to think about that as well. So I appreciate that comment. And then I also appreciate the questions by Councilmember Lozinski, just giving staff a little heads up. We were able to kind of work through some things. Obviously, we'll work through it here at the meeting too. But I think it just makes us better to kind of look into things. And so asking questions and bringing up things really does help. So just want to make those two comments, and that's all I have. So.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Jason?
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to let the council know that I'll be going to the Downtown Business Association meeting next week on the 4th to talk about the downtown reconstruction project. We'll start to give them expectation of proposed timelines, should everything stay on track, and start to talk about construction needs, concerns, and maybe start to dabble in the assessment conversation. So we'll just let you know that that's going to happen, and we started the process tonight with calling for the feasibility report, and we'll continue the process as we go along. So hopeful that we can stay on track there. Echo what Councilman Labatt said. If you have a hydrant or an intake near your property and you can keep it clear, we really appreciate that. If you cannot, or it gets to be too hard to move, certainly if it's covered, let us know, or let MMU know, and we'll make sure that it gets cleared. But anything you can do to help around your property saves us a lot of time. There's a lot of infrastructure out there. And I'll also echo the comments about the snow removal. I thought the street department and everyone else did a really great job. And just a reminder that it takes a team, and the street department leads it, but then there's community planning, engineering, wastewater, parks, building department, I mean, all these staff people that pitch in to make it happen. So they do a good job. I think that's all I've got. Maybe one last reminder to clear snow on the sidewalks for Councilman Meister to get his message out there. I think people have been doing a pretty good job, but there's always some that are still missing it. And a reminder to move the snow on your own property. Don't put it on your neighbor's property. I don't like getting those calls. So that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you, Jason. The council does have the remainder of the items, the information items, as well as the listing of upcoming meetings. Is there anything else to come forward this evening? If not, is there a motion to adjourn? John and Russ?
So move.
I'll second.
Motion by Russ, seconded by John to adjourn. Discussion?
Happy
Yep.
New Year to everybody.
Absolutely.
We'll move to a vote. We'll close the voting. The motion passes. We are adjourned.